All right, good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this vitally important discussion tonight on the unprecedented crisis that's facing working people in the United States. This forum this evening is sponsored by People's World, which is the online home for all the news of the working class, labor, and democratic movements, publishing daily at peoplesworld.org. And it's also sponsored by Organizing Upgrade, which launched in 2017 to serve as a space where left organizers could discuss strategy, share organizing models, and formulate responses to the dangers, but also the opportunities of this unique political moment that we've been living in these last couple of years. Now, everyone who's attending tonight has a pretty good idea of really the absolute catastrophe that's facing us right now. With more than 5 million cases, the US is the world leader when it comes to the number of people infected with the deadly coronavirus. But shamefully, we're also the world leader in something else, and that is the number of people who have lost their jobs as a result of this health crisis. Just this week, the jobless figures that were released showed that there are at least 30 million Americans on unemployment benefits right now. But the AFL-CIO and a lot of labor economists say that the actual number is really closer to 50 million or even more. In Washington, we have President Trump and the Republican Party largely ignoring the jobless crisis altogether. Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans have basically said, screw you to workers, and they let that $600 unemployment benefit expire, which has really put the squeeze on a lot of people. And when it comes to creating jobs for those who have lost theirs, well, the Republicans are also AWOL on that. Now, we've put together a panel tonight of people who have a lot of experience in organizing, not just around questions of unemployed, but a variety of different areas and with different constituency groups of the working class. We've got a big opportunity right now before us to kick out the Republicans in the Senate and the White House who have done nothing on the crisis we're facing and really dragging their feet, and that is the November 3rd election. But the unemployment crisis isn't going to disappear without concerted action from working class people, both employed and unemployed. And we can't really wait for the election to get us moving. We need thoughtful, creative ideas and militant action. And a lot of the people we're going to hear from tonight and the coalitions that they're involved in have been gaining a lot of useful experience that the rest of us need to hear about. So we're going to talk with some of them, find out about the efforts they've been leading, hear about the militant action that's already taking place, and find out how we can do even more to get some organizing going. Now, I'm CJ Atkins. I'm the managing editor of People's World, and I'll be serving as the moderator for this event. But I want to introduce to you the people we have on the panel who are going to share their experiences with us tonight. We have from the Coalition of Labor Union Women, we have Elise Bryant, who serves as the president of that organization. It's a position she's held since 2017. She's a retired labor educator, having taught labor history, leadership, and communication at the National Labor College. She was the artistic director of labor theater at the University of Michigan, and many other positions. So she's going to share with us some of the work that the Coalition of Labor Union Women has been involved in. We also have Bill Fletcher Jr. with us, who is the executive editor of globalafricanworker.com. He's the president of Trans-Africa Forum and a senior scholar with the Institute for Policy Studies. He's been an activist in the labor movement since his teen years when he got started as a welder in a shipyard, and he's really been involved ever since, serving as a national staffer with the AFL-CIO and serving as a syndicated columnist and media commentator. And if you're ever in the market for some working class fiction, I happen to know that he is a novelist, just having published his first work of fiction, The Man Who Fell from the Sky, just released last year. We have with us also Judith Leblanc, who is the director of the Native Organizers Alliance. She's a citizen of the Caddo tribe in Oklahoma and is known nationally as a Native training and organizing coordinator and teacher for a lot of different organizations. In the last 10 years, her organization, the Native Organizers Alliance, has been building relationships with tribes, traditional societies, and grassroots community groups, both on reservation and off across this country. She's got a long history of involvement in many areas of struggle. I've known her for several years, and I'm happy to see her again on the panel with us tonight. From Sioux Falls comes Cooper Carraway, who's the president of the Central Labor Council there. Whenever he was elected to that position, he was the youngest president of a Central Labor Council in the United States. He's the son of a retail worker mom and a truck driving dad in Texas, which is where he got his start in organizing work. In high school, Cooper was an advocate for immigrant rights already, and eventually got involved in the labor movement. And I was looking back through some of our older articles in People's World, and I saw his name first came up back in 2014, whenever he was the director of the Young Workers Council, doing some organizing at a Texas university. So he's going to talk with us today about the struggles going on at some of the meat processing plants and the things that workers have been facing up there in South Dakota. Next up is Joe Henry, who is the president of the Iowa League of United Latin American Citizens. He was formerly the national VP for that organization's Midwest regions. He's been a field organizer and a civic campaign leader for the Teamsters Union in DC, has managed statewide campaigns against things like English-only ordinances, led a 2-year battle against the Iowa Secretary of State over trying to suppress Latino votes. So like the rest of our panelists, a long resume that we can keep going on, but I'll let Joe talk more about some of the things that he's working on. We also have from Texas in Austin, Brad Crowder, who is helping to organize an unemployed worker organizing committee there. And although Brad's a bit modest, I think he deserves some of the credit for being one of the people that helped put together this panel tonight. So we're grateful for that. He's got a long list of organizing work that he's done with a number of different unions and campaigns, including the UFCW, the American Federation of Teachers, and the Fight for 15. And he rounds all of that out with a degree in economics from Texas State University. And then we have a special guest who will be joining us. I'm not sure if she's on the line yet, but she will be joining us shortly. And that is the soon-to-be Congresswoman for Missouri's 1st Congressional District in St. Louis, and that is Cori Bush. She's a worker, a nurse, and a fighter, and she knows firsthand how the health crisis and the jobs crisis is hitting real people at the ground level. So after winning that primary on August 4th, I think it was, she's now set to become the first Black Lives Matter activist in the U.S. House as well. So we'll be hearing from her in just a while. All right, so that's an introduction to our panelists. The structure tonight is that we're going to have a series of questions from me to the panelists about some of their work and the organizing that they're involved in. We'll do that for about an hour, and then we'll turn it over to the audience to offer their questions. I encourage you to start thinking about the questions you have now as you're listening to some of the presentations, and you do that by using the Q&A box that you should find down near the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a section of buttons there, and Q&A is the last one. Please use that one for your questions rather than the chat box, because that's where we'll be drawing from. So with that introduction, I think we can jump right into it. It's now 8:10. So I want to start, let's see here. I wanted to start with Elise and the Coalition of Labor Union Women. Everybody's being hit by this unemployment crisis that's come out of this pandemic. But the numbers also tell a pretty clear story about how women are bearing an even bigger share of the job losses. Ever since March and April, each month we see that the unemployment rate for women is always a couple of percentage points at least higher than for men. And then if you throw into that all of the homeschooling, the extra meal prep, and the childcare, these are things that have always fallen on women, but now it's added into the middle of this pandemic. So I'm just wondering if you can talk about what kind of experiences that CLUE is seeing among its members, and what kind of organizing is going on around those challenges for working class women right now.
Well, as you know, and as you said, CJ, that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on working women's health and employment. 1 in 3 jobs held by women was designated as essential. So the rest of the world figured out what we've known all along, that the work that women do is essential. More women have lost their jobs between February and May than any other group. It's in sharp contrast to the number of jobs that men have lost, twice as many in this time period. And August 13th was African American Women's Pay Equity Day. And again, although Black women are employed in occupations that have been essential during the pandemic and are essential, opening and recovery the economy, Black women experienced large pay gaps across many occupations, across 6 nations. So Black women nurses make less money than white male nurses. But the group that's been the hardest hit among women has actually been the Latinx women, who have experienced a steeper decline in employment, like, you know, more so than anybody else. And the reason is, of course, is because they've been employed in the leisure and hospitality industries, where 14% of the Hispanic women were in 2018. So, and those jobs have been decimated, and they have not been called back, and they're not able to work from home. So that's been in terms of that. And we're looking at our members, and we have chapters all over the United States, and we know that people are doing work to help relieve that by, you know, helping to staff with, you know, food banks and making sure that people have whatever they need in terms of care, but also in terms of medical help and attention. And it's fortunate for the women who are union members in that respect because of sick leave. But for the women who are not in unions, it's devastating.
All right. I wanted to see, is the future Congresswoman on the line with us yet? Because I wanted to follow up on something that Elise was just talking with her. No, not yet. Okay. I know she has to call in on the telephone, so it's harder for me to see when she's with us, but we'll circle back around. If I could then, I want to pick up on some of these themes, but I want to go to Bill Fletcher next, because he's someone who has experience, you know, in the labor movement at a lot of different levels, local, national, international, and everything in between. So Bill, I wanted to ask, you know, what are the challenges that you see in organizing the unemployed? Elise has just talked about how, you know, this crisis is hitting women disproportionately, but we have so many millions out of work. So what about the organized labor movement? What about unions? What can they do to be a part of this? But in the meantime, I do see that the soon-to-be Congresswoman, Cori Bush, is with us on the line. Thank you very much for coming and joining us, and welcome. We want to welcome you to this event. So I wanted to give a few minutes to you. I know your schedule might be tight, but give a few minutes to bring us greetings, and hope you'll share with us some of the situations that you've seen in your district and what working people are facing right now with the pandemic raging, the campaign against systemic racism still going on, and then of course this jobs crisis.
Yeah, well, you know, good evening, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. Sorry if my voice is a little raspy, but you know, as long as you can hear me, that's all that matters. I'm so excited to be able to talk with you all, even if it's just for a moment, because this work just seems to continue. I feel like we've been fighting, and we look forward to, you know, more fighting, but at least we're doing it together, and we have a vision, we have a goal, and in the process of it, people are being helped, more people are being radicalized to help us to do this work, and I believe that we'll get to what we want to see if we continue to work hard and just persevere. For those that don't know me, I'm Cori Bush. I am the Democratic nominee for U.S. House for Missouri's 1st District. If I win in November, which we believe that will happen in this heavily Democratic district, I will be the first Black Congresswoman for the state of Missouri and the first woman woman in Congress for this district in the history of both. But to get into this subject that you all are talking about, you know, when I think about this district and where this district was before COVID-19 touched down, you know, we were in a place where we were already saying that we needed a $15 an hour minimum wage, and we were screaming in the streets for it. We were already saying that unemployment isn't what it we have so many issues with unemployment in the area. We're not where we want to be. We were saying that poverty shouldn't be where it is in St. Louis City, being one of the highest in the state, not the highest, but one of the highest in the state. And so we were already fighting these issues. And so now COVID-19, and I'm putting COVID-19 in the mix because it has changed lives for so many. It has exponentially increased unemployment, and it has, and actually we don't even know the real impact because you can't really measure it right now because of the pandemic. So the numbers are like quadruple and even more in some areas, but we don't even know if those are the right numbers. It could be much more. But the employment rate being for women, women being the highest. And here we are again, women, we know that statistically women, when disasters happen or when just disruptions in the economy happen, oftentimes women are the ones that get, are really hit hard. And we're seeing that happen right now. That is one reason why we have to remember that we have to think about who we are electing to these positions. We need working class people to be in these positions of power, making these decisions, because not only do we know the numbers, we can look at the numbers, we can get the research, but we also know we have the life experience. We know what it's like to be that person that's been unemployed, or that person that's going to a food pantry that you can only show up to once a month. And I know because I've been that person. I know what it's like to be uninsured or underinsured, or working very low wage, or being unemployed and not knowing when I'll be picked up for a job again. So we have those experiences. And so that helps us to be able to write legislation or push real legislation, because who are we talking about? We're talking about young people. We're talking about women and children, our elders, our disabled community, our immigrant community, Black people, people of color, being especially impacted. And then we think about like companies who do telework, those companies that, they were able to help keep those employment numbers, even though they're terrible, the unemployment numbers are terrible, but they were able to keep them at least where they are. Well, those positions don't often benefit the groups that I just named. They're mostly white and white collar workers, while the groups that I named a lot of them are on the front lines. Locally, right here in St. Louis, Black women carried the most cases of COVID-19, but Black women, in the Black community as a whole. But we're talking about people who are the essential workers, who are the ones that were making $9 an hour or $10 an hour and still showing up to work as those essential workers in the nursing homes and as the cashiers and the clerks, some of whom lost their lives. So they lost their lives, some of whom did end up losing their jobs. So it's our job to make sure that we're making sure that the voices of the people that are actually out there on those front lines, the people who are losing their jobs, even people who thought that they were safe, who started losing their jobs in July. We have people who are being laid off and furloughed in July. We have evictions that started in July. So me personally, I've been saying all over the place that, once I'm in this seat, I'm going to push hard for that $2,000 a month universal basic income for every single person, and making that retroactive and making it last for 1 year. And also the extra money for each child, plus the making sure that we continue the moratorium on evictions and we continue to cancel shutoffs. Let's get our people through this crisis, but not only through the crisis, because we were hurting before, so let's not act like we were in a good place before and this just hit. We weren't in a good place before. So making sure that people get to a place where they can, where people aren't starving, putting more money into social programs instead of taking it away, and then help get people to get back on our feet and help these businesses, especially those that didn't get the PPP loans and the ones that did get PPP loans but are still laying off their workers. I've had many small businesses reach out to me and say, Corey, that $5,000 they gave me wasn't enough. The money that they gave me, I had to lay off 70 people, or I had to lay off 17 staff. And that's where we are. This was just 2 weeks ago. So I am here. I'm fighting for our workers. I'm fighting for each and every person that I can, every marginalized group, every person that has a mouth that needs to be fed. I'm here for you, and call on me, because, that's what I do. I get on the ground and I'm fighting for our people, but let's do this together.
I think you've hit on probably some themes that we're going to hear a lot tonight, which is that there was already a crisis, for a lot of people before this hit, and it's still unfolding. It's nowhere near being over. So thank you very much for those responses. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, let's try to come back to Bill. We had some audio problems earlier, but Bill, I was asking about the challenges that we face in trying to organize the unemployed, and what the role of the organized labor movement might be in that.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. So I'm sure that was the NSA that was interfering with my communication. I want to start somewhere else, CJ, because of something I came across today. So it says that there's this NBC poll that indicated that Biden is doing actually exceptionally well compared to Trump, except in one area, and that is in terms of the economy. That likely voters by 10 points put Trump ahead. And I was in the middle of shopping when I saw this, and I just, I wanted to just start grabbing people and saying, am I reading this correctly? I think it's really important that we situate the economic crisis not as being caused by COVID. It was triggered by COVID. There's a big difference. I was years ago, I was almost blown up in a gas explosion. And basically my wife woke up and smelled the gas and then called the gas company. They showed up and they said, if you had waited a little bit longer, you'd be dead. And the thing about it is that what would have killed us was the gas being ignited. It wouldn't have been the spark. It would have been the gas blowing up. The COVID was the spark. The underlying problems in the economy have been there, and so there's issues. This becomes really important in terms of how we talk between now and November, but also after that. The people have to understand that there have been some underlying, very deep problems with this economy that have been getting worse and worse, and that COVID triggered it. So that's my preface. Specifically in terms of your question, my experience is that organized labor, by and large, doesn't do very well in fighting unemployment. Sometimes it will respond when members of a particular bargaining unit that unions represent are laid off, or a company is shutting down. But in terms of thinking strategically about unemployment, forget it. I mean, for the most part, the organized labor just doesn't do that. That every so often there have been discussions, and I remember in the midst of the last collapse, there were some discussions in the AFL-CIO about some experimental work on organizing the unemployed. And then all of a sudden, I think it was the 2010 election was upon us, and that whole idea was thrown out. So one of the issues we got to look at is why does this keep happening? And why shouldn't the organized labor be at the forefront of actually leading campaigns around the unemployed? And I would argue that right now, it really does need to be doing that. And we on the left need to be pushing it. And we need to be pushing it not just because of what the soon-to-be Congresswoman was saying, but without sounding cynical about this, there are two segments of the population you never want to leave unorganized, if you know anything about the growth of fascism. One are veterans, and the other is the unemployed. And that when these two segments are left unorganized by the left, the right sweeps in. And as we saw in the 1980s during the so-called farming crisis that affected the Midwest, neo-fascist groups swept in and had very coherent answers to farmers who were losing their farms. Their answers were wrong. Their answers were anti-Semitic. They were racist and dangerous, but they were answers. If we don't come in and actually provide progressive organizing direction, don't think that folks are going to be just like left there by themselves. The right will sweep in. And when we hear Trump today talking about the Democrats are to blame for the Postal Service not being funded, you can see how easily they can just start flipping the script. And that's what I think we've got to really be thinking about, and meaning that we have to put a hell of a lot of pressure on organized labor.
Yeah, I think building those links, between organized labor and these other challenges that maybe they haven't always been moving on. That's something that I'm hoping others are going to give us some feedback on their experience too tonight. Judith, to transition to you, to hit on this theme that we're already picking up, which is this ongoing crisis, which is just exacerbated, for Native communities in this country, whether urban, rural, on reservation or off. The current health pandemic and economic collapse is really just the latest crisis on top of many that they've been living through for a very long time. So what are some of the new features of how this crisis is playing out right now for Native communities, and how is it reshaping or affecting the organizing that your organization had been focused on before this spark, so to speak, happened?
Well, I just want to say, CJ, very happy to be on this panel, especially with such esteemed leaders, and congratulations, Congresswoman Bush. I am a dual citizen. I'm a citizen of the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma and a citizen of the United States. And I think one of the huge interruptions, and I think Bill is right, when we talk about the impact of COVID, I tend to call it an interruption. It's interrupted, not changed, but interrupted the economy. It's interrupted politics. It's interrupted cultural continuity. And no one, no matter what age, can say that we've experienced this kind of an interruption. So young, older, it's kind of like a level playing field when it comes to strategy and tactics. And in Indian country, the most amazing things have come out of the Rona, that people, new groups, new initiatives around food sovereignty. It was hitting in the spring. People who never thought they'd get their hands dirty, who've lived all their lives on a res, but would never plant a garden, got together, communities got together. In Yankton Reservation alone, over 200 families decided to deepen their understanding about traditional ways of agriculture, what to plant, and then they pulled resources with the help of a traditional Lakota women's society, and they rented a plow for all. And they spent 2 days just plowing it up and the land and then planting. And that's an example of people turning to community. I also think that American Indians have never been online in the way that we have as a result of the Rona. I mean, it's almost mind-blowing. Everybody gets online with their phones. We have very low rate of access to 5G or broadband. So there is a social distancing powwow that has, I don't know, maybe 500,000 members. There's people who are gathering. We Native Organizers Alliance, we did a sewing circle to make traditional women's skirts. 700 people registered for it because people want that cultural continuity. But I think that as Bill was saying, and as I like to say, the Rona just shown a big spotlight on what we've been experiencing, and now it's getting worse. And the issue is, how do we stand kind of in governance? We know the systems are failing us. And so that's what, people in Indian country are trying to struggle with. How do you stand in governance? How do you try to provide and support, defend communities, while at the same time not losing a focus on the horizon? Because if you're constantly focused on reacting, then your strategy is going to be all messy. It's going to be all zigzaggy. And the truth is that we see at the grassroots a lot of people in Indian country, but other places where grassroots people are standing in governance. We need massive change of priorities in federal spending so that more money can get to the communities where it belongs, where it originally came from. And in Indian country, some tribes are just getting the checks from the first bailout COVID bill. And so there's some deep economic crisis, generational unemployment that now we don't know how long it will go on. But I'm feeling that there's a certain amount of, they're not going to take more from us. They're not. We just finished a survey of over 6,000 people in Indian country. 80% of those people marched in response to George Floyd's murder. So we have a very politically developed idea of being really a part of the overall magic movement moment, but yet we have very, very different problems because we're the only peoples that collectively own land that we self-govern, good, bad, and ugly. So I'm feeling that the elections and how we can guarantee mail-in and or healthy in-person voting is the biggest concern that many people have. Right now we have 8 Indians running for Congress. First 2 Indian women ever elected was in 2018. We've never had our Barbara Lees. We've never had our John Lewis's for our children to see standing in governance. So the elections, now that we have 2 American Indian women in Congress, we now have 10 running for Congress. And so I think the most important thing is how we focus in on the 7 states. This is for Indians, the 7 states where the Indian vote is one of the swing votes. This year we have more political power than we've ever, that's ever been recognized. We've always had it, but it was never organized enough nor recognized. So in 7 states, we're a swing vote that controls 77 presidential electoral votes. So we did the math for them, and they, I think that many people have seen what the power of the vote, native vote, can be in this crucial election.
All right. Now, I think the power of the vote in the elections is a topic we're probably going to be returning to a couple of times this evening also. I want to draw out this thread about, longer term strategic thinking versus being forced to react to the struggles of the moment. And Cooper, a lot of us have been following the situation in Sioux Falls there with the workers at the Smithfield meat plant. And this is a struggle where the workers really have been forced to respond and react in real time to something that's happening immediately right now, be it trying to get protective equipment or save their jobs or influence local officials. So I want to know if you can tell us all a bit about the fight that's going on there and how it's, especially the jobs crisis part of it and how that's affected the organizing.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Thank all of you for being on the panel as well. The Smithfield plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, it's a union plant. It's been a union plant for 100 years. About 3,000 employees. The right to work state still upwards of 90% union membership. The workforce there was in a unique position to identify the coming crisis in a way that the state and local governments were not able to identify. a majority of workers there, overwhelming majority of workers at that plant are of immigrant and refugee background. And so one of the first things that we did after I was elected president of the local labor council is we organized a committee called the International Solidarity Committee. And the International Solidarity Committee is made up of immigrant and refugee worker leaders, union leaders, people who are stewards, some that are just rank and file members, but folks that are from all different countries. And so we created the International Solidarity Committee. The purpose of that was, number one, to give leadership and voice to the immigrant and refugee communities within the labor movement and within the broader working class. Number two, to help organize new incoming immigrants and refugees, help educate them on their rights as workers and help organize them into unions. And number three, also to educate American-born workers on labor struggles going on in these people's home countries, in Africa and in South America and Central America and Asia, in places like that, so that we can consistently have, so that American workers can consistently have that connection, knowing they're part of global labor struggle. The labor movement is a global labor movement. A lot of times we in the AFL-CIO are as guilty as anyone else in talking in terms of the American labor movement, the American unions and this and that. And that's very helpful sometimes, but oftentimes it leads us to forgetting that we are a part of a global struggle for working class justice. But because we had built those institutions before the coronavirus hit, the workers at that plant were able to identify early in 2020 that the plant could become a potential hotspot for the virus because they're in constant contact with their families, their fellow workers, their friends back in their home countries. And so they're getting reports from Asia, from Africa, from Eastern Europe, from South America of how the virus is impacting them in their communities. So they raised the alarm really early in 2020. Unfortunately, the bosses at the plant didn't take the concern seriously. The workers were raising the alarm. We stopped having our cultural events. We stopped having union meetings. We started having them virtually. We started adjusting to this, months before the plant agreed to do any of these things. And because of that, because of the inaction and timidity of the bosses, it led to that plant becoming, for quite a while, the #1 hotspot in the United States for the coronavirus. An interesting thing about while it was the #1 hotspot in the United States, if you looked at the list of the top 10 hotspots, the Smithfield plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota was really the only place that was a typical workplace. Every other place on the list of hotspots were prisons, they were jails, and there was a battleship that was out in the middle of the ocean. But other than that, the Smithfield plant in Sioux Falls was the #1 hotspot and the only traditional workplace that served in that way. And so we organized the community. The community was able to do a car caravan in front of the plant to encourage solidarity with the workers. And we were able to put pressure on local and state leaders to eventually shut the plant down for about 2 weeks. And then we brought the CDC in and OSHA, and they were able to do a scrub of the plant and issue a report. Unfortunately, the bosses, because their bosses did not cooperate fully with the CDC, they refused to release quite a bit of data, assuming data that would show that they were guilty of some wrongdoing there. But if it wasn't, the constant, before the crisis, the constant organizing in these communities, in the community, in the workplace, and all of the and engaging in all these different aspects of life, because a lot of people think of themselves as workers. Yes, you're workers, but you're also a dozen other things. And so if you're not engaging in all these different aspects, like our brother Bill said, someone else will come and organize you based on that identity if you're not covered already.
All right, Joe, I know that Joe Henry, your work has also been lately focused in a lot of ways on workers in the same industry as what Cooper's talking about. And A lot of the workers in the meatpacking and food processing industry are often undocumented immigrant workers. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to us a bit about how are the undocumented workers making it, against this mass joblessness and the struggle to even get any of the benefits that might be available.
Thank you, CJ. Well, this has been difficult to answer your question. Undocumented immigrants have had a very difficult time in the meatpacking industry, as we know, and as Cooper made it very clear, we have several 100,000 workers in meatpacking. Many are immigrants. Many are Latinos, and it's been very hard for these workers to enforce their rights in the workplace, to file grievances, to go to state and federal government to file complaints through OSHA and so forth. So it has been, and then of course, the thing that Cooper is probably very aware of is when it comes to these workers who have been encouraged by the meatpacking plants to file unemployment when they're not working for several weeks, when they're trying to recuperate from being infected. It's very difficult for them to file for unemployment if they're undocumented. Of course, we know how that works. We don't have to go into that discussion. So the employers, the bosses, they know what's going on. They know that they have held these workers hostage. They know that these plants are incubators for the virus. And then when we look at the amount of infections, over 30,000 meatpacking workers have been infected to date, according to some of the national research, and over 200 have died. But that's reports coming out of only 22 states. So we don't have reports from the other states that are not reporting to the CDC. So with the work that Cooper, through his Labor Council, is doing, and through the work of other local unions, there's a Kim Cordova with UFCW number 7 down in Greeley, Colorado, who's also doing a pretty amazing job. This is a difficult time, and as a Latino community, we have been held hostage. Our 60 million people within the Latino community, here we are having to fight things like this. Not only in meat packing, but also in agricultural work. And then, of course, we have the other essential work out there in construction and so forth. So it has been difficult, CJ.
So let's continue on this, this theme of how difficult it can be, under such unprecedented conditions to do organizing or to gain access to benefits. I want to go to Brad in Austin, who, as I said earlier, he's been doing a lot of the organizing work among the unemployed. And so, Brad, I just want to, even in so-called good economic times, as we've been hearing, it's very difficult to organize workers when you're up against bosses that are very opposed to unions, to workers' rights, to any kind of assertiveness on the part of workers. What does it look like to organize unemployed workers, especially right now in the midst of this crisis?
Yeah, thanks, CJ. And like others have mentioned, I wanted to say thank you to everybody who's on the panel right now and everybody who's taken the time to attend it. One thing I do want to point out is there's a lot of rough things going on, but I want to talk about the fact that there has been an explosion of movement in response to this, very organic, that is kind of bubbling up all across the country. And it's taking a lot of diverse forms right now. So you'll have areas that are focusing on tenant organizing, trying to prepare people to face down the coming eviction wave. There's also been something very exciting, and this is kind of in reference to something that's been brought up on the panel a few times. I've had the pleasure of connecting with the president, Chelsea Glaubitz, of the Minneapolis Regional Labor Federation. They actually set up a very impressive labor solidarity program up there where they have people who can help newly unemployed workers start navigating the bureaucracy of filing for unemployment. They connect unemployed workers to the food bank that helps them navigate applying for SNAP. They connect them to legal aid to help them negotiate with landlords or navigate the unemployment or the eviction process. And so I have been able to reach out to the Central Labor Council here in Austin And we're working to, we're going to be having a meeting this coming week to figure out what it would look like for us in Austin to build something similar in hopes of trying to proliferate a model. And when we spoke with Chelsea, and her team, one of the things that they mentioned was that they had this system set up and they were ready to go, but they were having a problem connecting with unemployed workers. That's something that they had mentioned. And one of the things I've been involved with, and I've been in communication with people around the country who are trying to do something similar, is the formation of an unemployed worker organizing committee to draw unemployed workers together. This is based basically off of just applying traditional labor organizing methods to the circumstances today. So unemployed workers might be unemployed, but they're also still workers. And in my experience, I came into this particular moment, I was working at a quick service fast food restaurant towards the end of my degree. And my coworkers and I had been working to organize a union at our company for several months. And we had built an organizing committee of workers that was active and had, a fair amount of leadership in it. And when the COVID crisis hit, everybody was very scared. Everybody was very confused. We weren't getting any information either from our political leadership, and we weren't getting any information from our boss. And one of the things that kind of shook out when the organizing committee stepped in to try to provide some leadership in that moment is there were a bunch of people who were immunocompromised, who had medical conditions, and also were frankly skeptical about risking their lives for, $8 an hour. And we were able to organize and put pressure on management to allow people who wanted to take voluntary furloughs to take that. And they wouldn't contest the unemployment claim, which would open up for people who didn't want to take the furlough more hours for them. And so when we, fought and we finally managed to put enough pressure that management delivered that statement in writing to everybody, there was kind of a mass exodus from the company as people left out of concern for their health and safety. And that could have been the end of the story, and we could have, gone our separate ways and just hoped for the best. But we actually all stuck together, not just the organizing committee, but people who had just recently been brought into the campaign. And we formed a Facebook group that served as kind of a mutual aid hub, and we help each other navigate the unemployment process, which is, very, very difficult. And because we had some connection to the labor movement, we were able to leverage some of the tricks of the trade, as it were, to make sure that 100% of the people who took that furlough with the union organizing campaign got on their unemployment, and everybody was able to stay home and stay safe and not have to worry about paying their bills because we stuck together. And even further, after that, we could have all gone our separate ways. But we still maintain connections and contact. And now we've seen the rise of this National Unemployment Action Campaign, which is sort of an umbrella that has been set up by the Center for Popular Democracy, which is sort of a distributed organizing model, right? Where they're trying to provide a platform to connect people all across the country. And we've been able to bring some of the leaders from the workplace organizing campaign into the union campaign. And so while there are some very clear differences in terms of the circumstances that we're facing, the pandemic makes it hard to connect to new people, makes it hard to leverage what we would consider our traditional levers of power, like demonstrations or direct action. A lot of the basic principles of organizing remain the same. One-on-one conversations, building strong organizing relationships, doing consistent follow-up, being respectful of diverse experiences and cultural backgrounds. For instance, a person who actually has become a good friend of mine, when we first met, he had campaigned for John Kasich. He was a conservative evangelical Christian. And while he still remains a conservative evangelical Christian, he had become a very important leader, very active in the labor movement, and is now involved in the unemployment organizing. And we've maintained a very close connection, and we're actually good friends now. And that was because we applied.
Of building unity there.
Yeah. And it was because we were able to put some emphasis on our common interests that, you know, laid a basis for us to build a relationship of mutual respect, even when we didn't agree. I mean, don't get me wrong, we had some real knockdown, drag out arguments, but it always came from a place of mutual respect. And because we were patient with each other, we were able to grow together. And now we're both involved among, you know, other people. And so I think we want to leverage how distinct this moment is while not abandoning all the lessons that have been passed down from, you know, our forebears that they fought so hard to make sure that we have today. So it's very exciting, even though it's also very scary. But in this crisis, like every other crisis, there's a tremendous opportunity if we seize it. And that means getting organized, and that means sticking together, and that means building unity in the face of some really powerful forces. But we've done it in the past, and we can definitely do it today. And I'm really excited to be a part of that organizing project.
All right, I just want to remind everyone who's watching online that we will have a question and answer session from the audience shortly after we do another round of questions or so. Be putting your questions in that Q&A box at the bottom. That's where we'll be drawing those from. So just a reminder there. You know, you were talking a lot about the health and safety challenges as a part of that. And especially in a country like the United States, where there is no public universal healthcare program, losing healthcare is a big part of this crisis also for unemployed workers. And I wanted to ask Cori Bush there in St. Louis, you know, I know on the same day that you won the Democratic nomination, there was also a Medicaid expansion approved there by voters, even in opposition, you know, against the opposition of the governor and the state legislature. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a bit about, you know, what does that expansion of Medicaid mean for people in the state, especially, you know, in the context of losing jobs and possibly losing healthcare and health insurance. Okay, well, let's keep on this theme of elections. So now that we're in the run up to November, and I want to ask Elise, you know, we're at the 100-year mark since women's suffrage was officially won in the United States, but it's taken a lot of struggles over the past century to make that real and to make it have some substance. So what do you see as going to be the role of women in labor, especially in this election? And are the things that CLUE is doing to fight some of the voter suppression that's going on right now?
Thank you, CJ. You know, I love Bill Fletcher. He's like one of my gurus. And so I'm was thinking about what he said. And I also had that stunning moment when I heard that the economy, that people felt that Trump was doing well with the economy, like crazy. But what we're experiencing now is an apocalypse in the true meaning of the word. It's the Greek word that means uncovering. It doesn't mean the end of the world. It means that something has been torn away. And literally the curtain has been torn away by the pandemic and what's been going on with the murder of George Floyd, so that lots of people are woke in ways that they weren't before. And of course, at CLUE, we're like, this is our time. The place is now, the time is here for women to really push and surge, because we're at that tipping point, and we can push in a way, not only to get women out to vote, but getting everybody out to vote, making sure people are in the census. So we're really working on that on the Chapter 11, on the national level, of making sure that we have a month long of activities that we're planning, where every day there's an action to be taken to not just get out the vote, but to be working with people, to deal with people with what's happening in terms of you know, health insurance, and because people are lots of workplaces are struggling with that. I mean, Amazon workers, Walmart workers started coming together, you know, back, you know, a couple months ago, to be talking about, you know, striking because they realized that their workplace, it was hazardous work. And so that's where our push is, to make sure everyone's registered and that people go out to vote. And we're doing this collectively with the other constituency groups of the AFL-CIO. So we're working with LACLA. I just had a meeting with them on Thursday, the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, for the Coalition of Black Trade Unions, A. Philip Randolph, pride at work. Everybody is saying, okay, let's pull our resources together to see what we can do. And it's challenging because of the social distancing. But there's nothing like a challenge to find new ways and innovative ways. We're on Zoom. If somebody had told me 4 months ago that I would be on Zoom talking with people's workers, no, I would say, no, that's not me. I don't do that kind of stuff. But we're here because we know we have to do something different than we've done before. Because if we keep doing the same thing, that's the definition of crazy.
This whole idea of having to do something we've never done before, and you mentioned this has been a moment of revealing, pulling the curtain back on what we're facing, and I want to go back to Bill because a couple of weeks ago I saw you on a panel, Bill, where you were talking about how times of crisis reveal the opportunities for really dramatic transitions that can happen if the government intervenes. And those interventions can benefit Black workers, marginalized workers, all workers. I think you talked a bit about this in your earlier answer, but I wonder if you could maybe give us a quick expansion on what kind of government interventions do we need at this moment, and what's it going to take to win them, both in the lead up to November, but also after.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, let me first thank Elise for her compliment. Thank you, Elise. See, one of the things I think we're in a moment, and I want to build off of what Elise was saying. We're in a moment when we have this an economic crisis and an environmental crisis, catastrophe actually, that has been unfolding. And then we had COVID strike, the economic collapse, the lynchings, the mobilizations, et cetera. And in this moment, one of the things that's happened that was summarized by a friend of mine talking about what younger activists are saying these days is that the government can no longer say that there's no money available. That when you look at what happened back in March and April, before Trump and others really did the demographics, all of a sudden money was available. And so one thing, and this relates to what our soon-to-be Congresswoman was raising, is that we are at a moment when very little is impossible. And I think on one level, people know that. I think that the Republicans in Congress are trying to go backwards a few steps and return to the politics of austerity. I don't think that that's going to work too well because people have seen, the limitations of that. The problem is that we're going to need to figure out ways of being incredibly disruptive. And I don't think there's any way around it. So there's educational work, there's organizing work that can be done electronically, but we're also going to have to figure out other means. And this will be especially true if there's an attempted coup in November. But even if there's not, we're going to have to put pressures. I'll give you an example, something that I recommended around the Postal Service. So, and I was hoping postal unions were going to pick this up. The attempt to destroy the Postal Service has increasingly met with opposition. For a long time, people were very passive. Now people are speaking up. But if you really want to raise hell, there need to be caravans that go through our state capitals. Like 1,000 cars, traveling the speed limit, going through state capitals with speakers, megaphones that are talking with the public about what's going on with the Postal Service. Now you think about 1,000 cars going through any city at the speed limit. Nobody goes the speed limit. You go to speed limit, that is going to completely screw up traffic. And it brings the kind of attention that we need, right? We've got to be very creative. So this is not a moment to think that things are impossible. This is a moment to start as Elise was raising, to start being incredibly creative. And I think that the fight around the Postal Service is one particularly important fight. The fight around the unemployed. I mean, you know, we're going to have to figure out ways of stopping evictions. You know, people are suffering. And I think what we're seeing is the genocidal gene of capitalism is reemerging. It's always been there, but it's like every so often it comes out and it demonstrates that at the end of the day, they don't really give a damn whether millions of people die. They really don't. It's not like they're necessarily putting people under gas chambers. It's more like they just don't give a shit. It's like if people die, they die. That is what we've been hearing. And now we have an opportunity to really flip the script, pointing this out, holding this up in front of people. This is the system. This is the way it's operating. Not because it's mistaken, but this is the way the system operates. This is that moment. And so I think we can really be quite successful in turning things around. Now, it also means keeping the pressure on the Democrats. You know, as much as I hate the Republicans, let's just be clear that if Biden and Harris get elected in November, I'm really hoping that they do, but that particularly when you're looking at the issue of the unemployed, we should not make the mistake that we made in 2008. And I'm going to say this and then I'm going to shut up. In 2008, people said to me, Bill, should we give Obama a honeymoon period if he's elected? I said, yes. They said, how long? I said, 24 hours. People started laughing. They thought I was joking. I wasn't joking at all, right? But let's look, in the first 24 hours, look at who got appointed, chief of staff, et cetera, right? So while we were out there partying and talking about history, they were making moves that weren't really great. Mm-hmm. So I've learned my lesson. There will be no damn honeymoon period, right? It's like the guy gets elected, and that very day, we've got to be putting pressure on these Democrats. You can't give them an inch. You can't give them a nanosecond. We've got to be on their case. Think about what would have happened in 2009 if we had a march of 1 million unemployed workers going on to the White House before the Tea Party emerged. I would argue there wouldn't have been a damn Tea Party. We would have trumped them, no pun intended, right? So we've got to learn some lessons. This is the moment.
All right, I think you've given us a very memorable phrase for the evening. The genocidal germ of capitalism has revealed itself again. All right, I want to stick to the same question for Judith, because I know, Judith, you've written in The Hill and a few other places lately about the need for a just recovery. And just wondering if you could give us, a brief highlight of what do you think that just recovery has to look like?
Well, I think that's the issue I was bringing up earlier. A just recovery is about us thinking and looking at the horizon while we're creatively reacting to all the crap that's coming down. But us looking at the horizon means that you got to probably spend 55, 60% of the time thinking about the horizon, 40% of the time reacting to all the crap that's coming down on us. Because if you have an orientation to the furthest one can go, then what you do in the day-to-day matters. So from an Indigenous frame of reference, the past and the future come together in the present. The way you walk in the present, what you do in the present matters because it is influenced by the practices of our ancestors and all who have lived before. And we're thinking about the horizon, our descendants. Like, what are they going to point back to in 2020 and say about us? So how you walk in the present is critical. And that's why just transition has become such an amazing conversation at the grassroots level, urban and res and rural, to national policy levels. Now look, the Trump administration has destroyed the EPA, NEPA. It's going to take us probably a decade just to regain the ground on government regulation. And I think one of the things that's very important about this moment you know, the just transition folks, they're working despite this interruption, and they're thinking about how do you govern. I've been working on a project in South Dakota for almost 5 years now about helping one tribe regain moral, inherent, and legal right to co-govern the Missouri River hydroscape. And so we've been dealing with building their scientific capacity, building the spiritual and the cultural capacity to mobilize the community for people to take the power that we have to protect the water supply, to protect the river. And I say this to say, I don't think that there is a model for us to do this kind of work. And I don't think that there's one way to do this kind of work of trying to regain native traditional rights to be caretakers of water. And I think for the left, it's really important in an interruption like this, where the systems are all failing, the left has to remember that there isn't one way to skin the cat. And so many times, unfortunately, people hack into the good old days of the Great Depression as like the mountaintop of organizing.
Right.
And frankly, in the 21st century, we've never experienced anything like this. The level of dislocation, the attack that the labor movement has been under, the fact that there's been a right-wing offensive that unlike many of us have seen in some time, right? Ideological narrative and political moves. So I think I agree with Bill that we need to be loud and disruptive. But I think for the left, we have to understand there are many, many roles for different movements. And, you know, like to say what the labor movement should be doing, okay. But the truth is that unless we have every single sector of humanity that lives on Turtle Island playing their role in addressing the economic crisis, the climate crisis, then we're going to come down with a very narrow line of view towards the horizon. So I would really urge people to, yes, the Depression, really amazing impact on social policy, transformational social policy that changed the fundamentals of how the government works under capitalism. Right now, well, I think that we have to have a real conversation about what do we want in the future. And you know, I'm not talking about like 10 years from now, I'm talking about next year, because it's true, there's going to be like November is going to be a hellhole. It's going to be a mess. We're not going to have the results of all of the election stuff, but we have to be gaming that out. How are we leading in order to have the focus be on meeting the needs of the people? We have to game it out, and we're not thinking that far ahead, frankly. So there's no magic formula that we can rely on from the past. All we have to do is to think about what is working on the ground right now and what we can do to continue the momentum that exists in the way that people think about things. Maybe not ready for total action, but we've had, you know, 10% of the adult population marching in the streets for the last 4 months, according to the New York Times. So.
Yeah. Okay, we're coming up soon on a question and answer period from the audience, but I did want to quickly get in a question to the other panelists. And you were just talking about how we need to also, you know, draw on the practice of ancestors. And Cooper, even though it might be a bit outside of your main area of work, you know, Judith's response just now reminds me of something that I heard you say. I think it was at an AFL-CIO convention a couple of years back, and you talked about how the United States throws our elders away, and that the only measure of their value is the labor that can be exploited from them by some boss, and then they're just thrown out. Well, in this crisis, the unemployed crisis, it's often been senior workers who are not just facing the worst health impacts, but if there is any kind of so-called economic recovery, it seems like senior workers are also going to be facing a lot of problem in finding jobs again. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand a bit on what you were talking about back then. I know it's drawing from something you said a while ago, but maybe you can just talk about it a bit.
Yeah, so that was at the 2017 National AFL-CIO Convention, and if that quote reminded you of what Judith was just talking about, it's because that quote was inspired by some of Judith's own words. Judith has
all right. Well, that makes sense then.
Judith has been quite influential in my development as a organizer. I think that well, what I was speaking specifically about, I was speaking from the floor in favor of a resolution calling for a workers' bill of rights, and saying that not only should there be a workers' bill of rights to the United States Constitution, but that the AFL-CIO should be involved in organizing to make that happen. And one of those rights that the workers' bill of rights would guarantee is the right to retire with dignity. Dignity is something that is not valued by this system that we have in this country, whether it's the political or economic system. For the most part, as has been referenced by some other panelists, the system, for the most part, as old Jimmy Hoffa would say, you're just part of the truck. You're part of the machine. You're part of whatever. You're part of the grill. If you work at McDonald's, you're part of the grill. You're part of the cash register. You're only part of the machine that the bosses need in order to keep profiting. And once you need maintenance, or once you are done being part of that machine and you're ready to retire, they'll throw you away. That's why, I've said over and over again, it's evident that this country does not value its elders as much as we talk about it. We do not value our elders because our elders oftentimes cannot survive past their usefulness to some boss. Once the bosses decide you're no longer useful, then oftentimes they're left to return to to either starve and die, to either freeze to death in the winter, or die of heat stroke in the summer because they cannot afford to pay their bills, or they're forced into restarting the employment cycle by going back to minimum wage jobs, working drive-throughs. It kills me when folks opposed to minimum wage increases say, oh, these are only meant for high school students. I see more of my elders at a drive-through than I do Gen Zers or anyone else. I see more, it's elders that are greeting me when I walk into a supermarket. It's elders that are doing these minimum wage jobs, and it's because they are given the option to either try to survive on your meager Social Security check that you're getting, and unless you have a union pension, then you're forced to survive on that meager Social Security. And if you've been able to save, then you just got lucky because this economy collapses every 5 or 10 years and you lose all the savings that you've been able to develop. And so what I was speaking to, and what I think we have to support, particularly as we talk about what that horizon looks like, as we talk about what we're prioritizing. And this is a system that has been built over the past 200 some odd years that never really took into account the well-being of children or elders. It focused primarily on men, primarily on men who are of working age. When you're a child, it does not prioritize you and meeting your needs, and when you're an elder, it does not prioritize you. It's because it's so much harder for the capitalists to exploit children and elders because they are of less use to them. And so that's what I was speaking about. And when Bill and Judith and Elise, talk about moving forward in the call, I think the AFL-CIO needs to not fall into the habit of what my grandfather would refer to as rabbit hunting. Now, rabbit hunting is if you're hunting a rabbit, then you've got your 22 over your shoulder and you're walking through the woods, and every time a rabbit there's not really any strategy. Every time a rabbit pops up, you shoot it. And so very quickly, so the democratic movements and the trade union movement can fall into that same practice of rabbit hunting, that every time an issue pops up or every time a crisis pops up, we're going to try to address it. But there's not any real strategy. So we don't feel like we're actually going anywhere. We're just shooting rabbits when they pop their heads up out the trees.
Right.
And so when we talk about I'm glad that Judith and Bill and Elise had brought up these terms of looking at the horizon and thinking strategically. And I think when the AFL-CIO convention overwhelmingly passed the resolution demanding a workers' bill of rights and saying we should organize for it, that's one of the things that we have to organize for, because I haven't heard anyone else say it, but I'll say it right now, that if we had that workers' bill of rights, this pandemic would not have hit us nearly as hard as it did.
Right. Joe, what are some of the links that are being built right now between some of the efforts that Cooper's talking about, the stuff that organized labor is or should be doing, and groups like LULAC? What ground is being broken right now or should be?
Yeah, well, good question. What we're seeing now, almost every week, of course, I'm seeing this in my town, Des Moines, Iowa, but we are having protest vigils by the local BLM movements, Black Lives Matter movement, composed of many people of color, many young people. And they have become a force here in Des Moines, as they have in many areas across the country, to fight to end police brutality. It has also been a way to work with the unemployed. Now, the COVID-19 virus has also set up the stage for things that we were fighting for in the 1980s with the unemployed councils. One of the primary things was to do food banks. We know that schools are doing food banks for kids and their families right now throughout the country until the schools start again. They may not start again. But these visible things of, as we say in the Latino community, Dolores Huerta once said it, get off the sidewalk and onto the streets. That is happening right now. That is happening with people of color who are engaging. The Black community is leading the way through the young BLM leaders right now. Latinos are playing a part of it, as with Asians. It is really important for us to be engaged in this struggle. We need to go away to kind of separate the philosophical, theoretical discussions and just get out there. I mean, social media will do for us what we needed mimeograph machines to do back in the 1980s. We can communicate how we can help out. Art Shields, who I met in the 1980s, who was a reporter for the Daily Worker. When I asked him when he was 94 years old, how did you organize during the Depression? He says, Joe, you don't get it. It didn't happen overnight. It took us decades. We were helping people with keeping in their apartment, with helping them with food and just subsistence. Those were key things. The BLM movement is key. We have to find ways to connect to help amplify their effort. At the very least, we need to be marching with them. Clearly, they have educated their leaders quite effectively. It's a very Marxist discussion that happens whenever they have their events. They talk about workers' rights, about the rights of people, what democracy should look like. So we have to be engaged to fight that police brutality, which is a fight for more democracy, a fight against suppression. And through those efforts, we can engage with local elected officials, state officials, and members of Congress. This is just a very energetic time right now. So we have that opportunity. Unemployed organizing committees and councils can now be part of what BLM is doing, and we need to play our part in doing that. And that's what people of color are already doing. And of course, you all know that. And I applaud the discussion we have right now, but clearly all we have to do is jump into the pool and just be there with our brothers and sisters and just help them to amplify their voice.
All right, I've just got one more question for the panel, then we're going to go to the questions from the audience. Brad, Joe just talked about some of the unemployed councils movements in the past, and without idolizing those efforts of the Depression or of the 80s, like Judith has cautioned us against, without idolizing them, what kind of lessons have you gotten from looking into some of those past unemployed council and organizing committee efforts?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's really exciting. I was actually lucky enough to track down an original printed copy of the official organizing manual for the unemployed councils from 1933. And, you know, I think it's online now, you can find it, but that had a really big impact on me because you could see both the things that, you know, resonate today, but then things that are obviously very, very different and need to be dealt with a little bit differently. And I think one of the first things that I noticed, both from the unemployed councils from the 1930s and the Jobs or Income Now campaign from the 1980s, is that you have to start by building at the base. You have to start by engaging in grassroots organizing. That's what they did in the 1930s. You know, the unemployed councils had a national campaign to establish an unemployment insurance program, but the councils were really built off of gritty, granular, neighborhood level fights. You know, everybody knows about, you know, the eviction resistance and things like that. But there was countless things that people would do. And the thing is, there was so many constellation of different issues that are facing people every single day that you couldn't document every single one. And so rather than getting lost in like, what's the one set of demands that we can establish for the whole unemployed movement across the country, we have to start by building relationships with unemployed people and their allies at the grassroots level, just the same way that we organize a union, right? If you want to organize a union, you don't go like proclaim like, well, you know, every fast food worker needs a union. You got to go talk to those workers. You got to build relationships with them. You got to build union organizing committees on the shop floor, develop those people as leaders in their own right. And while doing that, just like in the Jobs and Income Now campaign and the Unemployed Council, you have to do it from a perspective that recognizes that we have to build a national structure that can unite us all together. You have to balance both a national perspective with a grassroots perspective. And I think I had the opportunity to meet with the Unemployed Action leadership a few days ago. And that was one of the things that we had a really great conversation about. Is Unemployed Action is a national campaign. It's like an umbrella campaign, but they're looking for ways to connect at the grassroots level, right? Well, for me and the people that I've been working with, you know, we've been kind of coming at it from an opposite perspective, where we're trying to build these institutions at the grassroots and find a way to navigate to a national perspective. And so now that we've found this opportunity, which I think speaks to what Judith was saying, you can't be so fixed in like a dogmatic assertion of the past that you lose the flexibility to adapt to the current circumstances. And so rather than thinking we had a clear blueprint to build, oh, we got to go do this and then, you know, X, Y, Z, when the Unemployed Action popped up, we were able to leverage what we are doing with what they are doing and set ourselves up to begin distributing both a national perspective, fighting for the extension of the unemployment insurance, being prepared to mobilize everybody for the November 3rd elections, but also building unemployed worker organizing committees at the bottom. And that was one of the things that really stuck out with me when I read that manual about the unemployed councils. And this is something that I've seen, it's kind of driven me a little bit crazy, to be honest, is you'll get online and there'll be like all these unemployed councils popping up all over like Facebook and things like that. And, you know, like, just like, you know, general strikes or unemployed councils, they're not dogs. They don't just call because they don't come because you call them, right? You gotta build them. You gotta systematically and patiently build them. They're never just proclaimed. And so the actual structure of the unemployed councils were built by holding assemblies in neighborhoods where you brought allies together, unemployed people together. They would elect their own, what they called a committee of action. And this committee of action was not the council. That was the one that was responsible for when people were locked out of their homes from evictions. It wasn't the council, it was the local committee of action that would go rally all the neighbors together, and they would go, you know, crack open the lock and move everything in.
Neighbors helping neighbors right at the local level.
Yeah, and it was a situation where rather than thinking there was some universal structure that they could just proclaim because they had things worked out abstractly based on their ideology, it was something that they built out of the day-to-day struggles, these really gritty struggles. And if you look at some of the greatest labor leaders, and especially for people who went on to have a profound impact on the American struggle for democracy and socialism, like Henry Winston, for instance. This was a gentleman who was a profound hero. He got his start being recruited into the unemployed councils, right?
Mhm.
And that helped set him up to be a really historic leader for, the workers movement, for the democratic movement, as a chairman, even despite his repression as the chairman of the Communist Party, he still was able to maintain his connection because he built those experiences at the unemployed councils. And I think lastly, one of the most important lessons that I've noticed is that, when the 1935 Wagner Act was passed, the CIO recruited 1 million workers in 6 months. 1 million workers joined the CIO, and they went on to, organize the working class up to about a third at its peak of the entire workforce, right? But when those workers, when that law was passed, it didn't fall out of the sky. When those organizing committees on the shop floor in Michigan were built, those workers weren't learning that for the first time. The workers on the job had gotten experience because they had previously been unemployed, and they had been brought in to the idea of organizing and the idea of movement building by the unemployed movements, and that those lessons stuck with them, and they carried those from off the job back to on the job. And so that, I think, is the profound opportunity we are facing today, right? Is that we're looking at a situation that's it doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes. The unemployment or the union density, at that time before the Wagner Act passed was about the same as what it is today, about between 10 and 11%, right? And so even if things are very different, we need to be conscious of that, but we also need to make sure that we are absorbing the lessons that people paid a very high price to pass down to us. A lot of sacrifices were made for this. And I think that has been a really important lesson to me, that we can't just proclaim it, we got to build it. We can't just repeat what was done, but we got to still apply the lessons flexibly. And we got to be prepared for when the conditions change. People will go back to work at some point. And, we want them to take that spirit of organization and that spirit of struggle back onto the job site with them as part of a broader movement for democracy and workers' rights across the country.
Okay, so a lot of important lessons to take, but knowing we can't just copy those old experiences. All right, we're running a bit behind the schedule, but we want to allow a bit of time for some questions from people who have been watching and listening in. So I want to ask for Scott Hiley to help manage some of those inquiries from the audience. So Scott.
Thank you, CJ. Well, we're going to start with a question from, sorry, just a sec here. With a question from Jake Rosner. So in Chicago, we've got about 16,000 hotel and restaurant workers laid off. Their union, Unite Here Local 1, is reaching out to them. So we're going to actually ask Jake Rosner from the Member Assistance Committee to kind of share his experience in building this movement. So Jake, your mic is open. Go for it.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit of color of what we've been doing in Chicago. I'm an organizer with Unite Here Local 1. Like you said, we represent hospitality, restaurant, airport, casino workers. And I really like what Judith said about we've got to figure out how we meet the needs of the people. And so since the beginning of the layoffs, we have about 80% of our 15,000 members are laid off right now. And so we started out with doing a member assistance team focusing on getting food cards out to folks, helping people navigate bills, and then specifically taking on unemployment cases. And that's really grown. I think it's really, really changed our experience of the unemployment system, because it wasn't something we had taken on ever before. I think most members and organizers thought that would never be something that we needed to have our hands in. And obviously that's, very quickly changed in the last few months. But I think in particular, just really figuring out some creative ways of connecting folks to the unemployment that they deserve. It's kind of blown out of the water some of the recent grievances. We got $60,000 or $70,000 in benefits paid out to folks in just the last month or so. But I think one of the things that's really stood out is that since doing this from the start of the pandemic, in the week that folks started losing the extra $600 in unemployment benefits, we as a team really struggled with what's the message. Like, we've spent 4 or 5 months pushing this message and organizing folks around what we do to survive this moment. And I think the thing that we really saw was that folks really, really wanted a chance to jump in and fight for their situation that was more than just voting in a few months, but what could they do now? And so our team has really been a part of turning workers out. We've done a caravan action in Indianapolis at the State House, and then an airport car caravan a couple weeks ago, and about a week and a half ago, a hotel workers car caravan and march downtown. But the vast majority of the members who we're working with in this member assistance group are uncovered by committee. It's a lot of members who don't necessarily have a direct leader in the shop. And I think it's just been a huge experience to see how much those folks really are hungry for a chance to fight in ways that are very concrete about what they can do today or this week to be able to have some control in a moment where so much is out of their control. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for sharing that experience with the situation in Chicago. Back to Scott with the questions.
All right. Thank you, CJ. We've got first a group of questions on the sort of the question of what can people do. Starting with a question from Mary, who says, there's a group not often mentioned. I'm part of that group. In 2008, I lost 75% of my retirement. I'm almost 64, laid off from restaurant work, too young for Social Security, too old to catch COVID. I'm scared to death, as even getting unemployment insurance in Kentucky has been a disaster. I'm also a single mother of a 12-year-old with special needs. While I have been active with Unemployment Action, I'm feeling at a real loss. What else can I do? And kind of jointly with that, Roberta asks, how do we organize unemployed people for political power? Ibrahim brings us a question from Albany, looking for it on our list now. So what is one practicable tool or activity that someone or a group less familiar with organizing can use or put into our future organizer toolbox? Or what are the best places to go for organizer training and organizer resources? And I think that should probably do us for questions right now.
All right, so we've got 3 big questions. I don't think any of them were directed at a particular panelist, but we have a question about, the thrown away workers who feel like they've just been left aside. How do we build political power for the working class? And then what are the best places to get some practical tools and tips for activities? Anyone who wants to speak specifically to one of those? I don't want to put you on the spot. Judith, I see you. Yeah.
So I think one thing that is important to grapple with is that our peoples have been organizing since dirt. Organizing was not discovered by some white guys in South Chicago, just like Columbus did not discover Plymouth Rock. Community building, organizing, creating a circle that can move together since the beginning of time. Communities have been built that way. And from an indigenous point of view, almost all of our origin stories are rooted in that problem of how do you create a circle where everyone has a role to play. But what I think is sometimes lost when we are in such a crisis is that organizing isn't brain surgery, thankfully. It's one-on-one. It's getting to know people, who your people are, and building out from a framework of values. I mean, frankly, one of the things that Trump does and does it well is he leads with his values. Totally messed up. He leads with his values. And I think that we have to kind of go back to that place of organizing based on values of reciprocity, of community, and based on bringing together the people that we know. Because I'll tell you, if you impose a form on an upsurge that has never We've never seen the likes of the kind of upsurge we're experiencing and the attack from the right. If you impose a form and try to bring people into a form that is already preconceived, it'll be a little out of step with where things are at. So, you know, people are hungry, and people have also brought up that people are going to lose their homes, and they feel very individual. They feel alone in that. So how do you build out circles, concentric circles, in community after community? No matter what you call it, doesn't make any difference, but we have to build these concentric circles around unions, around community centers, around your own neighborhood, I think.
Brad, I'm wondering if you might take up that last question we got about, you know, give us in a 1-minute summary, where are the best places to get involved or find out some of the activities that people can, you know, find out some tips.
Okay, cool. Yes. So when I was first getting started organizing, I didn't have any experience or training as a staff organizer. And one of the resources that had a big impact on my basic organizer skills was a book called Secrets of a Successful Organizer, right? It's published by Labor Notes. I'm not going to endorse everything Labor Notes said, but that book had a big impact on my skill set. Another big influence is Jane Mcaleevey. She was a longtime organizer, and now she's like a labor scholar. And she wrote a book called No Shortcuts that I think is very, very useful. And I also actually have some resources that she did, 3 video trainings with worksheets and exercises to help people get their basic organizer skill sets up. And so if people want to call that number that's been flashing on the screen or text message to make sure that we have your contact information, I'll make sure that everybody gets access to those resources. I'll send out an email over that. And also I have been helping facilitate a bi-weekly organizing roundtable from people in different parts of the country, where we have people who are doing local work. Everybody gives like a short 3 to 5 minute report over their experiences and the stuff they've been doing. And then we spend the rest of the meeting working through a practical question around organizing. It's basically a roundtable workshop. Because that is an issue that I've experienced personally, especially a lot of younger people, is our democratic muscles have really atrophied in a lot of ways. And a lot of people don't understand, you know, they'll say, oh, I want to get organized. And what that means to a lot of, especially the younger generation, is I want to be an activist or I want to be involved. And mobilization and activism is very, very important, but it's different than organizing. It's a different skill set, and it takes a different sort of tack to do the organizing side, the relationship building, the follow-up stuff, the stuff that Judith was really talking about. And so that roundtable has been an important place for people who are struggling to learn these you know, initial organizing steps, you know, how to set up a meeting, how to draft an agenda, how to you know, work through that agenda and make sure things get accomplished. You know, a lot of people are just learning these things for the first time. Right. And so, you know, if you text that and reach out to us, we will make sure that people are able to get incorporated into these practical spaces where people can begin working together. And because like Judith was saying, nobody has a solution right now, and there's no blueprint that you can impose. Everything is being built experimentally and dynamically. And so this is an opportunity for us to link these different experiments and perspectives together to make sure that we're not imposing anything, but building off of our best experiences and building off of the best practices that we're discovering in a dynamic and ongoing way. So I would just really encourage people that to make sure that you connect, you know, with that text or that phone number, so we can make sure that we are continuing to keep that fight going. And as far as the unemployed action, you know, I totally understand where you're coming from. And that's why I think, you know, the other side of making sure that we're building local community connections, local committees can help people feel a little bit more connected, where you're not just floating in space and hoping this like national organization that you don't have any real say in is gonna, you know, meet your needs. So we want to balance that out and make sure people are getting those skills to build organization, fighting organization at the grassroots.
All right. Yeah, we'll keep flashing that text there, that number you can text to before the end. Scott, maybe we'll see if there are just maybe one more round of questions from the audience, and then we'll let some of the other panelists respond to those and some of the topics that we just had as well, just to get at least a little mix in there one more time.
Yeah, thank you, CJ. So we have a question from Emil. Is there any national effort to defend undocumented workers and their families against the effects of the coronavirus plus unemployment disaster, like an umbrella group with that focus? And keeping with that kind of the question of specific areas or challenges, Richard wants to know about what are the specifics, challenges of organizing in rural areas. And we have a question from Brandy. Does all of this also fall under the umbrella of the climate crisis? And how does that play in? Thank you.
Okay, let's think about how to split these up. Maybe, Joe, you could address that first question about the effort to protect the undocumented, and maybe Cooper up in South Dakota could talk about the challenges of rural organizing. And then Scott, tell me the last question once more. I'm taking notes here.
It was, does all of this also fall under the
climate
umbrella
crisis?
of the climate
Right.
crisis?
And maybe Bill, I know who's big on organizing in that area, can address that one. So let's take them in that order. Joe, can you take on the question?
Yeah, there's for the question of helping the undocumented, several groups. When you look at this, national groups. So you have LULAC, League of United Latin American Citizens. You have American Friends Service Committee. You have For Latino. Those are the top three. They can be found on the internet. And then, of course, those groups also know local groups that can provide legal support for the undocumented during this period of time.
Okay, Cooper, do you want to speak about the challenges of rural organizing?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Sioux Falls is a growing city, but South Dakota is mostly a rural area. In the upper Midwest, it's mostly a rural area. I'm actually from Alabama, a rural area. And so there are specific challenges when it comes to organizing, you know, outside of the big cities. It's never been, it's just different, you know, one's not harder or easier. Obviously, one of the things that some people may tell you will make it harder is that there is oftentimes less interest when it comes to like maybe the nonprofit sector, nonprofit industrial complex, or national groups. There's less interest in investing in work out in rural areas, and maybe there is in some work that goes into metropolitan areas, things like that. Obviously, people living separately, further apart, and things like that, it can make it more difficult. But really, organizing is organizing is organizing is organizing. And the main thing is, you know, talking to people and understanding their priorities. Working class people are not super different in a rural area than they are in a city area. The differences you'll notice are probably cultural, but in terms of what their priorities are, they're very similar. They want to live a peaceful life where they can support themselves and their families. And that's really the priority. And if you can get to know the people and help them find ways to meet those priorities, then it's not any more difficult than being in a metropolitan area. You just have to, you know, particularly if you're coming from a metropolitan area to a rural area, you have to be cognizant of your own cultural biases and things like that. A lot of progressive or liberal folks from metropolitan areas kind of look down, have a negative opinion of people who live in rural areas. But, you know, I have to tell you that the rural areas have been some of the most progressive in our country's history. In fact, North Dakota still has a state-run banking system. The only place in the country where you'll find a state-run banking system. They have the State Bank of North Dakota. They also have a state-owned grain mill and elevator system that is publicly owned by the people of North Dakota. South Dakota also has that history of progressive prairie populism. Back in the days when we're talking about in the cities, they were organizing unemployed councils. At the time there, every farmer, every worker in the Dakotas were socialists. They would show up to whenever someone would have their farm foreclosed on or their land foreclosed on, they would show up en masse to the foreclosure auction and allow the person who previously owned it to bid $1, and then they'd make sure that nobody else bid on the land, and there were physical consequences for anyone who did bid on the land. There's a great history of progressive populism in rural areas, and I think that folks have to remember that. But as Judith said earlier, and Bill has said too, organizing is organizing, and a lot of it is just talking to folks and understanding their priorities, whether they're in rural or metropolitan areas.
All right, we're pushing past our time, but I just want to close out with the last two things. Bill, if you could maybe address that question on the climate crisis, and Elise, I'm wondering if you might give us some closing words on that question that I think it was Roberta asked about. What does it look like to build political power for working class people? So be thinking about that one for our closing question. But Bill, if you could talk on the climate crisis question there.
Sure, I'm going to quickly, two things. One is, yes, this is absolutely related to the environmental catastrophe. We're dealing, and we have been warned for years that of the danger of pandemics, and we've dodged bullets, and this one we didn't dodge, and we can't expect that this is going to be the last, and it's because of the environmental catastrophe. And so in that sense, when people have been talking about a Green New Deal, I think it's very, very important on so many levels in addressing what we're up against, and the environmental catastrophe, the retooling, the jobs, et cetera. The other thing I want to quickly say is slightly different from a couple of other comrades. Right now, we're in a fight for organization. And one of the things that happens in mass, when it's mass upsurges, is a lot of people think that you don't need organization anymore. And I've spoken with people from two organizations who have identified crises in their organizations where some of their activists say, oh, well, the people are in the streets. We don't need the organization anymore. Danger, Will Robinson. If you look at the what happened in the Arab Spring, one of the things that's very, very apparent, you can have masses, you can have millions of people in the streets. If you don't have organization, you get some clocks cleaned. And that happened in Egypt, it happened in Yemen, go on and on and on. And right now, we need to be building organization. Where organization doesn't exist, needs to be built. Where organizations exist, we need to fight to make them relevant to the upsurge. But if we don't have organization, we have nothing, nada.
Thank you, Bill. So let's go for our final words from Elise on that question that Roberta posed to us about building power for working class people.
This is an opportunity for us to put collectively our knowledge together, to learn from the lessons of the past. We don't want to repeat it. And we know that we are in a different circumstance now, so that there are interventions that are called for. But if we haven't learned anything from our past experiences, it will take multiple interventions. There is no one size fits all. There's no one tactic that fits all. It requires thinking and strategy and planning, and this is my thing, education. That we need to be educating our members, our families, our friends, and wherever we gather, about what this economy means, what it is to be in a crazy capitalist runaway inequality system that was built on slavery and was built on thievery. A friend of mine said this the other day at a rally. He said that the laws are created to protect the thieves. They stole the land when they got here. They stole people from Africa and brought them here. And then they turn around and say, you know, those people, the Mexicans, they stole our jobs. And I hear Black people repeating that. And I think, oh, no. We need to be doing some education here so people understand how we got to this place and where we're going and what that vision is of where we're going to be. And to articulate that, not just like assume, but it means coming together. It means building small groups and study circles in whatever way we can so that we are providing the educational basis so people understand what it is that we need to do. Because this is a tremendous work. And we're going to keep doing it because the capitalists don't give up and we won't either.
I think that's an excellent point. We cannot give up. And, you know, that's been the focus of this evening is thinking about how we get organized, how we get people to come together to focus on this unemployed crisis and all of these other issues. And so if we can flash on the screen one more time, that number that people can text to so that they can start getting involved and organizing at their local level on these issues. If we can
CJ, just real quick, I want to thank all the people on this panel because I've learned a lot. I want to get your emails and, you know, find out what you're doing and stay in touch because this has been enlightening. Thank you.
Been a very great experience, and I want to extend thanks to all the panelists for giving us what turned out to be a couple of hours of your time on a Sunday evening. Sorry we went a bit over, but I think it was a great conversation. So on behalf of People's World and Organizing Upgrade, just want to say thank you very much. And again, everyone who's been participating and listening in, you can text Unemployed to 56525 to start getting involved. And I think we can close it out there and wish everyone a good Sunday evening.